G'day crew, Todd from Toxic Garage Customs. Hope you're doing well. Another day, a bit more cut, weld, grind, drive. So I'm really happy that we reached the point that we did yesterday, and that was to get the pedal assembly all but buttoned up in the International. So today we're going to play around with the mounting the seat. Got the seat popped in place. Got the seat popped in place there, and it's just sitting there. And I was sitting on it last night, and I think the first thing I noticed was that I probably could have put the steering column up just a little bit higher. I can work with this. I think it'll actually feel kind of sporty where it is, but I'm lucky that I've got power steering on this because I wouldn't want to put too big a steering wheel. I've got a couple of smaller steering wheels. I've got a nice wood grain one that might look good on this. But moving along, the seat is just sitting there at the moment, and they actually fit really well into these cabs. That's the original mounts on the bottom of it. Now what I'm going to do is I will modify the mounts so that they fit into this truck better, but I'm also going to make up some mounts that mount down to the floor of the cab into some really structural places, so that I can pick up the seat mounts and mount those onto the cab of the truck. Now, I don't want the seat to sit quite as high as what it is. I think ultimately I want the bottom of that plastic bit on the side there to sit down on top of the metal bit. So I think I really want this to sit down about here, and not so much from a look point of view, because I can dress it up to make it look however I want, but because I think losing that 50, 60 mil, whatever it is, a couple of inches, will give a pretty decent drive height. Now in Toxic, my Chev, I sit up probably about the same height that that seat is there, and it's pretty good. But I think in this one, because the steering wheel's down low, I'm going to put a slightly lower seating position to give it a little bit of a sporty feel. That might seem like a bizarre thing to say coming out of this, but not surprisingly, these trucks or anything mounted onto these Holden chassis, when you build the subframe on them like I've got here and some decent suspension, they actually handle really well. They don't drive like a truck by any means. They actually drive like, I compare it to like a late model four-wheel drive, which if you've driven one of those, actually drive pretty well. So that's today's plan. Going to work out how I'm going to mount that seat, and then I am going to fabricate the mounts, and then once I've done that, then I'll play around with the pedal a little bit more. But as you can see, yesterday I still had a column hanging down, no old junk in there, and today it's looking like you could jump in it and drive it. Well, sort of. I like it. I dragged the seat back out and took the runners off, and it's always good when you buy a seat, if they come with the runners, that makes life much easier for you. You can adapt runners off other seats, but why make life harder for yourself? So this is the runners. They just came out with two bolts, two 10mm bolts. This is a metric seat. So I've just got it. Got the runners sitting where they were when the seat was sitting here in the first place. I had some reference points. I knew that this was about where that was, and same on the other side, centered. Now, what I'm thinking is I'll probably cut the bracketry off here and the bracketry off here. I want to bring the seat down in height anyway. This panel, the old seat mount, has a natural lean back on it, and how seats are designed also, or most seats, is that the way the runners are mounted is that as you move forward, the seat normally gets higher, and that's for short people is really what it comes down to. Well, people that are shorter, so taller people, they want the seat back further and down lower, because that way it takes their head away from the roof. And shorter people, they want their legs to be closer to the pedals, and they want their head lifted up so they can see above the steering wheel. So these are designed so that as you go back, it gets lower and longer, and as you go forward, it gets higher and shorter. So I actually personally tend to like to have the base of my seat leaning back a bit further than normal anyway. I've got a bad back and I find that it helps my back. So what I'm going to play around with in the first place is I'm going to have the natural lie of the land, so to speak, through there, and I'm going to use that, what I just described to you about the way the seat works, and I'm going to try to put those tracks down so that they're laying on the same line as this. So what I'm thinking is if I cut that bracketry off and then make up a new piece to go to mount on top of that, or mount into it, or down to the floor, whatever, then I'll be able to lower the seat, I'll be able to get the lean back that I want, and I'll be able to get some mounting points at the same time. So that sounds complicated, but all I'm going to do is cut these brackets off, that one and that one, and then I'm going to start playing around with making up some new bracketry. So watch along with me. The tools I'm going to be using for this, I will use an angle grinder. There's some rivets in here. Going to be using an angle grinder to get into there. And these ones that I can't get to here, I think what I'm going to do, I will use my die grinder. It's got a wire brush on it at the moment. And I'm going to just put a suitable die grinder bit on it. So a carbide burr grinding bit. So this sort of thing. These are from Sutton Tools, these ones. They're not super expensive, and they work well. When I say they're not super expensive, they're not a cheap tool by any means, but they save a lot of work. I'll just try and find an appropriate tip. I just basically need something to be able to get into that tight space. So these air tools, I've got a pretty decent compressor over there. It was about $1,000. It's not top of the range. What is it? Chicago air compressor, and I'll do a shop tour at some point in time. It's a good thing. It does everything I need. Runs air tools, and it runs a spray gun. That's pretty much everything that I need. It does the job just fine. You've got to invest in these things if you want them. I started off with a free compressor that my mate Bone Man gave me. Shout out to Bone Man. He's my model for my merchandise. So my die grinder, I have a carbide tip on it, and this is going to be able to allow me to get into there and grind off. It's basically like a little grinder. Well, it is a little grinder. And put some oil into my tools. Ooh, that's loose. Compressed air, it's very loose. Compressed air has a lot of moisture in it, so I've actually got two moisture traps within my system as well. The longer the air hose, the more air is accumulated. So sometimes I'm using my air hose 25 meters away. So I trap the air twice, because trap the moisture, I should say twice, because the moisture destroys your air tools. Oil them daily. This is the air tool oil. And use a moisture trap. Now these things, die grinders, when you're using them, excuse me, when you're using them, they throw out sharp little bits of metal everywhere. I don't muck around with these things. When I say that, gloves, really important, and safety glasses. I always wear safety glasses. These are prescription. I'm blind as a bat without them. Sometimes I wear a face shield if I'm doing a fair bit as well, because you end up with all these little bits of metal sticking out of you. The same as if you're using wire wheels. They're notorious little things. You end up with little bits of wire sticking out of you everywhere. Anyway, enough chatter. Let's get to grinding these up. I'll put you on time lapse. So that only took maybe 5 minutes. So what I have is the track. So in the end, rather than going in and grinding in that deep part, what I realized was that if I flip it up this way and then slide the track along, then I could get to the other side of the rivets on that deep one. So I ground them off on that side. So that was done on this side, just here. I think that's the right end. On this side here. What I did otherwise was I ground out the top of the rivets, the bottom, whichever end you want to look at. So ground this part off and then slid the track along and punch the rivets out. Now hopefully those have cooled down. So this is the rivets. So these little things here. So cut the top off, then using a center punch, just punch them through, and that leaves these holes. Now these holes do, well, those rivets also stop the track. See if I can get this to move. Stop it from rotating. It'll do it for me. Okay, so they hold it in place basically. So what I do need to do is make sure that what it does, it twists this way. I think it's pivoting on this rivet that's left here. So I do need to make sure that I fix these points back together, so the top and bottom of the track and this part here. The reason I've removed all this, so just to go back for a second, this part was up this end, this part was up this end, this part was down that end. Now, just to point out, this is folded sheet metal. Now it is pretty thick, it's probably about 2.5 mil thick. It's folded sheet metal. Folding metal and putting swage lines in it and all that sort of good gear makes these super strong, like really, really strong. So while this part here could be a weakness, the fact that it's got this part here coming through it adds some serious strength into it. So there's no way I could bend that with my hands. I could belt it with a hammer and probably bend it, but even that would be difficult. So don't underestimate just how much strength is in that. Those rivets, they're as strong as what a piece of steel is going to be at 5 mil thick. But their shear strength must be pretty good. Now I'm no engineer, so I don't know. But what I am going to be doing is I'm going to be making sure that I can reproduce as much strength as what I'm taking out. So if I use bolts in here rather than welds, for example, I'll be using at least grade 8 high tensile bolts. And I may just weld this back together and so on. Really what it comes down to is the seat, if you have an accident, you need to ensure that the seat doesn't rip out of the floor. So the floor needs to be stronger, it needs reinforcing plates underneath it. And you need to be sure that the individual components don't separate. But realistically, there's no reason for it to be any stronger than what it is that you're reproducing. You can make it as strong as it and you should be fine. I always like to over-engineer, and that way, if I have an accident, then the seat's not going to fail. So that is the way I'm going to be dealing with this. So I'm going to jump over to this one, rip that one apart, put you back on time lapse, and then we'll have a look at the next step. So I've got both brackets cut off now. I didn't film the second one, it was the same as the first one. And I've got this sitting in place. So this is the driver's side. And what we have here is, this is the original seat base, and this is the track. So from this point here through to this point here, that's the part that needs to be mounted somewhere. And then this top part, it mounts to the bottom of the seat. So I've got it in the furthermost forward position at the moment. And now it's in its furthermost rearward position. So that's the amount of adjustment I'll have forward and backwards. So what I'm going to go with in the first place is the fact that the mounting track, this part from here to here, it's about 400 mil. It's also almost the same size as this. So it seems to me that if I make it so that it's centered to that, then that will be my travel. Now I'm not going to lock anything in just yet, but that's going to be my starting point, my reference point. So what I'm going to do is make up some sort of mount that goes from the bottom of this, and I'm going to pick up this. The fact that it conveniently fits into this shape and size well, and that is about where the track needs to sit. I'm going to use the fact that this is boxed steel, as in like there's a structure built there, and it's locked into the cab and it's flanged down here and locked into the floor. I don't think I can get much stronger than that. So, and that's where the original seat was mounted. So I'm going to make up some sort of bracketry, some sort of mount that picks up here and goes across to here. And my second thought is I could use angle iron. My first thought was to use something like this. And this is this is 50 mil square section, square hollow section, I think it is. Correct me. So what I'm thinking is, if I get that and somehow mount that to there, then I've got a good starting point. Now, as I said, I want the seat to be down low. So what I'm thinking is, if I cut this to the length that I need, that'll fit inside of this box, inside of here, and then place it down so it's on the inside, down here, then I should be able to fix it into here, and I will work it out, I'll work it out because I still need the seat to be removable, so I'll work out exactly where the removable components are going to be, and we'll have a play around with that. So leave it with me, I'll have a think, and I'll get back to you. I might even grab a cup of tea, we'll see. I've just cut a piece of this RHS, whatever it's called, square stuff. I've just cut a piece of this. I end up using, I think it's 40 mil. 40 mil. It seems that the track fits onto it nicely. I think it looks right. So there is a locating pin in the bottom of the track there. So I just drilled a hole for that. So that just locates in there. And then I'll work out still how I'm going to fix the track to that brace, or that mount I should say. But we have our first component in place, so I can move this backwards and forwards, which is all good. So I'll take this out to the truck and I'll sort of pop it in place. What I'm going to do, I'm going to make it in the first place so that it sits on top of that structure that I was referring to previously, rather than sink it down. And then if I don't like it, if I don't like the height of it sitting on top, then I can sink it down. So I'll start off with it high and I'll make it lower if I need to. Let's have a look at that. I've just got that sitting in place, and that's pretty much where it was when the seat was sitting in there. I took a bit of a reference point in the first place, and that mount was connected to that previously, and it sat about in that place there. It's not exact, but sort of where it's going to be. So that's what I'm thinking in the first place, is to have it at about that height, and I don't know if I'm going to be happy with it. Oh, actually, it probably drops it down 20-25 mil, so it might be okay. But as I said, if I don't like it, I can drop it down further. But what I'm thinking in the first place is to mount the track, or the bottom part, to mount the track to this piece of steel, and then, so that'll be fixed to the seat. It'll permanently be part of the track, like these were previously. But what I will do then is, I think I will intend to put a plate down the back of this, so welded to this, that can be bolted into the back of there, and then I'll bring a bolt up from underneath this plate into this, so that when I want to get it out, I'll be able to get my arm in the front of the seat here and be able to get to that bolt. Need to be a bit of a contortionist, but we'll see. It might work, might not. And the one at the back shouldn't be a problem, because that'll just be dropped down, and I'll probably weld a plate with a nut on the back, so that I can just get to a bolt just here, and then just lift the whole assembly out, and then it'll come out with the seat. I think that's pretty simple, and it should work, and that's more strength, in my opinion, than what these were previously. They'll be mounted to what was the seat mount. To me, it's the strongest part of the floor, so I think it should work. It's just a matter of the height. So let's sort of mock something up. We'll get the other one cut to this length. We'll mock it up, put the seat back onto the tracks, pop it in place, and see what it looks like. If it feels good, then it must be good. That isn't always the case, but no, let's run with it. So I've got two of those base brackets cut now. They're both the same length, got the holes in them and so on. Now I'm just going to make a tab to come down off here that will mount to the back, as I described a minute ago. And not surprisingly, I still haven't got any 40mm flat bar in stock floating around, same as I didn't have it last time I looked. But I do have this, and this is just a piece of 3mm, that's a bit of stuff that I found hanging around. So I'm going to make some flat bar out of that. So what I'm going to do is just cut it so that it's the same width as the tube, 40mm, and I'll cut it. I'm going to make it about 60mm longer than the tube, because that's about how deep that base part on the seat is in the cab. And this piece of metal just here conveniently is just slightly longer than two of those. So once again, I'll give this a clean up and I'll use it. I'm just going to tack it on in the first place, because this isn't necessarily my absolute final plan, but I'll tack that in place. And the reason I'm making it about 60mm longer is I'll be able to put a couple of bolts into it. So yeah, I'll do that. The front, I think in the first place, I'm just going to sit on that front panel on the cab. The back should give me enough of an idea to know whether it's going to work. So I'll quickly cut that, tack it in place, bolt the tracks on, put it back on the seat, and then bring it back. So I made up a couple of little tabs out of that metal that I was showing you, cleaned them up, got most of the rust off, or got the rust off, and most of the mill scale, which is from the manufacturing process. So that will go like that. This one up here, so I've just made where it's going to be welded on just slightly undersized, and I've chamfered the edges, the underside of this, and I've chamfered the edge of this as well, just so that I can get some good penetration with the weld there. I'm not going to grind the welds down unless I make an ugly mess of it, then I'll grind them down a little bit flat, but otherwise that's the way it'll be. And I've made it square on here. So just got to put a couple of tacks there in the first place, because as I said, I may not end up using them, but if I do, then I want them to be right, and I'll just check squareness there, because it doesn't look like it's actually sitting square. So I'll get onto that, I'll weld those up, and I'll let you watch the time lapse. So I think that went okay. I now have these brackets, as I said, just tacked these on. But what I have done is I've fixed the tracks onto these, because regardless of the height, the track will stay on here, unless of course I completely change my design, but I can't see that happening. Still a bit hot. What I did, where I drilled out the rivets earlier, I actually reproduced them with Weld. So using the same holes, I did plug weld, so I drilled right the way through. Had a bit of a blowout on the end there. I drilled right the way through and I created plug weld. So essentially I think I've created a rivet. So it's got a fat head, a fat other end, and the whole thing is filled with weld, and I really pumped the heat in there. But what I also did, I forgot I was welding on the end of a tube here, which tends to blow out. So I just welded the track on the end there as well, and just on the side, that part just there. In fact, when I cut it off the original brackets, there was a really crappy little weld on the side of these mounts just there. So I've reproduced that. And yeah, so it's got a fillet on the front, sorry, on the back, on each side. It's got the plugs there, and then it's got a bit of a fillet across the front on each of them. So I'm hoping that now when I put this on the seat, then I'm happy with the height, because otherwise I'll be dropping it down, and that'll just probably involve cutting these tabs shorter, because these will be close to the floor once they're on there. Yeah, but I'll take one out and show you. So this will be sitting something like that, and as I said, I'll come up underneath to bolt there, and this is where that tab is, just there. So yep, it's about 5mm short of the floor, so that will go there. The seat will bolt onto it. I'll do things like I'll clean this edge up, depending on exactly where this sits. If I'm lucky, it might sit over there and I won't have to worry about it, but if it overhangs the corner, I may or may not get worried about it. But I'll probably trim the corner off. I will box the front and back of these, but I'll do that after I've welded a captured nut in here, and after I've finished it basically. So I'm happy with that. I think it's going to work okay. It seems to be pretty straightforward so far. It's just a matter of whether I am in fact happy with where the position of the track is on this. And in hindsight, maybe I should have waited until I was happy with it before welding it on like that. But hey, it's only metal. I can cut it, I can weld it, I can grind it, I can drive it.